like it does when you watch it. This is Matt. When you watch it online, it translates, and then I guess it can turn that. I read a little bit about it, but I'm terrible with tech. But then it will turn that into various forms. You can, and it'll learn over time. If you have AI, it'll learn over time how you want it to do it. So it'll be, it's worth trying, and we'll see if it actually does it.
Okay. All right. I'd like to convene this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee Tuesday, September 24th, 2024 at 10 a.m. And I'd like to call this meeting to order. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'll read my pretext and then do the roll call vote. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all devices and phones. For items with public comment, after committee members have finished their discussion on an agenda item, the chair will afford members of the public up to 3 minutes to speak. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name and any affiliations. To give public comment, you must be recognized by the chair and speak through the chair. There is to be no crosstalk with others in attendance. In the interest of the efficient use of our time, yes, please speak through the chair. To be recognized for making public comment, use the raise the hand feature by clicking on the reactions tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then click on the raise hand. When you've finished your comment, please click the lower hand button. It's important for me to note that CRAC isn't required by law to take public comment. We do so because we definitely need your valuable input. We view public comment as a privilege, so please remain respectful in your comments and do not disparage others or members of this committee. Okay, so roll call. Jen Carberg.
Here.
Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Doug Rose.
Here.
And Peter Brace. Staff roll call.
Peter?
Yes.
I think Rachel is under Susan. Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Rachel Freeman.
Here.
Okay. Staff roll call. Leah Cabral. I'm sorry, Leah Hill.
It's okay. I'll answer to both.
Okay.
Here.
Vince Murphy.
Here.
Devin McKay.
Here.
All right. Great. First item of the agenda is public comment. That is not public comment on items that are not on this agenda. Does anybody have public comment? Any member of the public? Okay, seeing none. Approval of the minutes, August 13th, 2024. Are there minutes?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take a motion for those minutes.
So moved.
Second, Matt.
Moved by Gary and seconded by Matt. All those in favor by roll call vote. Jen?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Joanna?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Doug? Aye. Christy?
Aye.
And Rachel?
Aye.
Okay. Discussion on CRAC co-secretary replacement. And no, you cannot nominate the AI companion because they haven't been proven yet. It may be the way to go, but it remains to be seen. So, does someone want to put themselves up for this, or should we stare at each other? Come on, it's not that hard. If the two of you split it up, you're never going to do it all the time.
I nominate someone who hasn't done it yet. Because I know that, Rachel and I have done it and Doug has done it. So I think it would be great for someone else to take a turn.
Deja vu. This is how I became chairman. Everyone was quiet. And then I spoke up, but I'm not being secretary because I'm chairman. So someone's got to do it.
Peter, if no one nominates themselves, what we could do is assign someone. So Tim already said that he'll stay with co-secretary.
Okay.
So we can filter through everyone, for one meeting so that it adds up to, the 24 meetings over the course of a year.
Are you saying everybody takes
So
a
like
turn?
so everyone would take a turn for the meetings that Tim is not the secretary for.
Okay. Does that sound good to the rest of you guys?
That sounds fine. I just don't, I would do it, but I have no bandwidth right now. I just don't.
Yeah, Peter, I'm happy to, step in on that kind of schedule.
Me too.
Capcom might be up for a chair, so I don't know what's going on with that membership. So like Joanna, I'm strapped with bandwidth, but certainly don't want to just not contribute. So happy to jump in when Tim's not available. Certainly.
Okay. Very good. Gary?
Peter, I just don't have the skills to. I'm not that skilled in how to do that stuff. So if you ask me to help out, I can make comments to somebody else's, but I do not have the technical skills to figure out how to put those in place, stuff like that.
Well, I'd certainly provide everybody a template for the minutes, and just a brief explanation. You have the agenda, you have the template, which is basically the stuff that's always there: public comment and new business committee, natural resources report, and then you're just taking the agenda as it appears and putting it into that template, and then watching the YouTube video and using your own discretion on how much you're going to include. And you don't have to do it as anyone who has seen my minutes. You don't have to do it like I do it, like a stenographer. You can it's just decisions and what the topics were and who voted, and it's pretty easy, Gary. But if you can't do it, that's fine.
I don't have the word skills, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like we're in agreement that we'll take turns. We don't need a vote for this, do we, Leah?
I think you should vote just in case, and then we need to figure out who's going to be doing the minutes for this meeting.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, just, I'm in the same boat as some of the others. This would be the final straw that would break my back.
Yeah.
I'm probably putting in 40, 50 hours a week on town stuff, maybe more. And this would be the end of me. So and I'm running a business. So with the problems that I have going on here. So I'm sorry, but I just, I'm not volunteering.
Okay. Well, we'll muddle through, I guess, but we'll take a vote. Can I get a motion for sharing this responsibility?
Peter, I have a question just before we do that. On both of the other town committees that I serve on, there's somebody that is supplied from the town who takes the minutes.
Yeah, and that's a committee that you're on that is some sort of regulatory committee.
No, not the contract review committee, right?
Well,
We have a town person.
Well, I'd love to know who that person could be. We're an advisory, and the advisory committees don't get paid anyway. Vince, what do you got to say?
Thank you, Peter. Just to help, all of those other committees that have their minutes taken and looked after professionally are under contract. We can't add any more to the contract. It's the money is there and spent. And by the way the crack is set up, one of the charges from the select board is that the committee has to have a secretary in order to do minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So can someone make a motion so we can do this?
Peter, just to comment,
Sure.
to Vince's and Joanna's point, if there's a way, if there's no money available, if we could at least make an effort to get in the queue, and if there's a list of say, listen, we're interested, if there's someone available to help, that would be great. That's all.
Vince, do you think there's ever a chance that this could happen?
I don't want to give rude answers, but once you've already been given the charge that you have to have a secretary, I don't know why would that change?
Okay.
I agree. I think it's highly unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
You can always, this is Matt again, we can always ask. If, you know, the town so some of the town departments and the town itself is putting a lot of responsibility back onto this group of volunteers. And the staff, which is, sort of, is not that extensive. So, we can always ask, maybe AI will magically come through for us, and be a good example for everyone else, is what I'm hoping. But I think, if there's things that we as a group feel we need to move this along, I think we should not be afraid to ask for it. I think the current board knows how important a lot of the stuff we're doing is, and this, the town itself is not getting to some of this. So.
Okay. I agree. We should definitely ask, but for the near future, we need to do this. So can I get a motion from somebody?
Peter, if it's okay, I would be willing to do the minutes for this meeting, and I'd be eager to look at what the output is from the AI bot, because it may be substantially simpler than it was when I was doing this, and so I'd be willing to share the secretary task with Tim, with the understanding that I prefer it that Tim be considered the primary, and that I can assist when he's not available, like today. How's that?
Okay. Can someone make a motion to that effect?
I'll move that I become co-secretary when Tim is not available. I don't know how to express that.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded.
And thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
Doug.
Thank you.
Thank
Roll-
you.
Roll call vote. Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Doug Rose,
Reluctantly, aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Okay. Moving right along. Nantucket Harbor's sediment transport study and dredge plan presentation. My printer. On plan development and seeking committee feedback on dredging by a representative from the project team. So we've got Devin McKay and Vince Murphy. It's you guys. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Vince Murphy from the Natural Resources Department. Great to be back talking to this committee again. Honestly, I've missed you guys. Delighted that I can bring this back. This has already been presented once at a public forum about 2 weeks ago when Devin and her colleague Kate were both on island, and Devin is going to do the same thing here. For reference, we're going to take this to other boards, committees, and commissions. This is the first one. We're also going to go to hopefully the Conservation Commission, the Harbour Update Committee, and the Harbour Plan Update Committee, and I keep wanting to say SHAB. Please correct me, Peter. Harbour and Shellfish Advisory Board.
Correct.
Thank you. So it's going to do the rounds where we're looking for public information and public feedback, and specific feedback from committees such as this. We're at the early phases we're at the mid phases in this project. We have undertaken much of the field work. We have undertaken the models. Devin will go into the detail on that. And we now need some more broader feedback from those in the know, where we can start to look at dredging, what channels we can start to look at for navigation, where people or groups are experiencing issues. And that's the purpose here today. Devin can go through the presentation, and we're please looking for your feedback. Through you, Mr. Chair, and with your permission, I'd like to pass it to Devin.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks everybody. As Vince mentioned, my name is Devin McKay. I'm a consultant with Arcadis, and I'm the project manager for the Nantucket Harbor Sediment Transport and Dredge Plan, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So thanks again for having me. I'm going to try and get through the presentation portion of this rather quickly, so we have plenty of time to discuss. But if there's anything they have questions on, feel free to jump in or save them for the end here. So a little bit about our project goals and objectives. This statement really is here to help ground our shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve through this project and how we're going to get it done. Notably for this project, we're looking to leverage a data-driven process to help guide decision-making with respect to sediment management across Nantucket. Through this project, we're hoping to improve navigation in the harbors, help maximize sediment resources on Nantucket, while also avoiding any unintended ecological consequences to sensitive habitats. For this project, we've selected 3 project areas as our focus, as you can see on the screen here: Nantucket Harbor, Pulpus Harbor, and Madaket Harbor. And these were really chosen due to the importance of the navigation routes that are within these areas and the need to better understand how and where sand is moving in order to minimize any impacts to navigation. In order to understand that, the town is collecting information to answer the following questions. So we're trying to understand, how does sand in Nantucket's harbors move over time? How does sand movement impact navigation? Where and how often will dredging be needed? And are there opportunities to develop a sandbank on island? Can the sand that we dredge be used for beach nourishment? And if so, where should that beach nourishment sand be prioritized? So we're going to accomplish this through 4 tasks, which are shown on the slide here. First, as Vince mentioned, we developed a sediment transport model, which was informed by data collections that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a couple slides. And using the results of that sediment transport model and your feedback here today and through the other engagements that Vince also mentioned at the top of the call, we're going to identify, prioritize, and begin to plan for dredge opportunities within those 3 project areas that I indicated. Additionally, we're going to evaluate the model to better understand any beach nourishment needs and the potential for the beneficial reuse of dredge material, and also the identification of opportunities to develop that on-island sandbank. Once we have priority dredge and beach nourishment projects identified, we're going to collect additional field data and further develop those project designs to help support some of the required permits for those efforts. And all of this work really started in the spring of 2023. As Vince mentioned, we're kind of in the midpoint of the project now and looking to have things wrapped up in spring of 2025. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about our data collection efforts. So to help inform the sediment transport model, our team collected a bunch of different field data in the spring of 2023. And these data provide inputs for the sediment transport model that help to reflect the best available data within our project areas. And this really helps us to create an accurate simulation of the natural world, but within the sediment transport modeling platform. So the 4 things we looked at are eelgrass. So we mapped the presence of eelgrass for our study areas, but also for Tuckernuck to provide an island-wide eelgrass layer. And this was done through a desktop analysis of high-resolution near-maps imagery, which was collected in April 2023. This layer is consistent with the level of detail that has been used on previous eelgrass mapping efforts and can really be hopefully used to help inform projects beyond just the sediment transport study here. Next, we looked at bathymetry. Before undertaking this bathymetric survey, which is mapping the underwater depth of the harbors, our team completed a review of all the existing bathymetric data within Nantucket, Pulpus, and Madaket harbors. And so then our survey was able to target areas where we didn't have great existing data, right? And also we looked at areas where we would expect the bathymetry to change a lot. So areas where there's high flow, a lot of things moving around in the channels, places like that. And this survey was conducted in May of 2023. Through field verification of the bathy, we were able to indicate that our data is within about 1/10 of a foot in terms of accuracy. We also looked at water level monitoring. So we deployed tide gauges at 3 representative locations across our project areas. This was Upper Harbor, Pulpus Harbor, and in Madaket Harbor. And you can see one of them, probably very small, but that's one of the water level loggers that was deployed in Madaket Harbor. Data with these water level loggers was collected over the period of 1 month at all 3 of these locations. And this is really an important piece of input for the model because tides are a key cause of sediment movement. Lastly, we took sediment samples, and these were taken across the project areas, as you can see, probably again, also very small, but throughout our project areas with those pink and blue dots. And these locations were again chosen to help complement existing sediment data that was available throughout our project areas. Ultimately, we took 12 core samples, which look at what sediment looks like deeper underground, and then also 10 grab samples, which is just kind of looking at the surface of the sediment. And this was an important input into the model as it helps to inform the size of the sediment grains that we're modeling. And it was also kind of our first pass at trying to understand whether these dredge sediments could be used for beach nourishment. We found that largely sediment is suitable for nourishment. And so that's a good sign for moving forward. All right. Next, I'll move on to model development unless there's any questions. And I apologize, I can't see the participants right now. So
Devin, it looks like Doug Rose has his hand up.
yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Devin. Great job. I just had a quick question on near maps imaging. Is that a drone based? System? Yeah.
So the near maps is actually collected by satellite. Really high quality imagery. I don't have the maps up right now, but we can look at them later if you're interested. But it does a great job. The resolution is really kind of incredible. And Vince can attest to this, but you can see really an amazing level of detail of the shoals, which is pretty cool.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. I think with that, I'll talk a little bit about our model development, and I'll keep this fairly high level. But our model uses the Army Corps' Coastal Modeling System, or CMS. This was developed by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and importantly, it's a model that has been used throughout New England for many similar types of efforts. So this is kind of the gold standard for this type of work. And the model captures a number of different dynamics, including waves, winds, tides, and sand movement. To help inform this model, we collect data from a variety of different sources. So you can see here waves. We were leveraging the National Data Buoy Center, or NDBC buoy. And that one is kind of right off the coast between the Cape and Nantucket, which is great for our purposes. That's kind of exactly where we would want to have these data available. So it worked out perfectly. We also get wind data from that NDBC buoy. And that is also complemented with wind data collected by the NOAA station, which is actually, kind of right on island here. So a lot of great resources to help inform this study. Thankfully, they're all local and provide really long-term data inputs for this type of project. For the tides, we considered the tidal gauges that we measured for the purposes of this study, the ones I talked about a little while ago. So we used that measured information as well as tides from the NOAA station right in the harbor there, and the Army Corps tidal database. Lastly, for bathymetry, we looked at the bathymetry that we measured, so the stuff that we collected during our field efforts. And this was also complemented by existing NOAA bathymetry that has been taken within the harbors at various times. So with that, I'm going to jump a little bit into our initial model results. And we have a couple animations here. I'll give a little bit of background to just kind of give you an overview of what we're looking at on the screen. And then I'm just going to let the animations kind of play out so you all can take some time with them and kind of absorb what they're showing. I think that's the easiest way. So hopefully we can get this to play. So we're starting here in Pulpus Harbor. I think this full animation actually shows about a month worth of tidal cycles if we let it play all the way to the end. The brighter colored areas, so the red and the green, yellow that you're seeing in the channel there, that's indicating current with a higher magnitude. So the water's moving faster in those areas. And the direction of the arrows is showing us the direction that the current is moving in. So you can kind of watch as our tides move in and out here, and I'll give it a moment just to play.
Devin, I see Jen Carberg has her hand up too.
Sure, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Devin. I'm just curious looking at this. I know this is the model's projection of current in magnitude, but did you guys actually do any velocity or current measurements to kind of proof with the model? Because you had tide gauges, but I didn't see anything about current or flow data.
Yeah, so that was something we talked about early on in our data collection efforts. So we had considered deploying kind of the underground or underwater current meters, but decided that wasn't necessary for the level of detail that we needed for this study. So that was not something we collected.
Okay.
While the model is playing, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Vince.
Through Peter.
Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you. The way that this information is presented, Devin, could you explain one or two things that I remember from a previous presentation about how there were summer, winter, and storm modeling done?
Yeah, good point, Vince. So for each of our project areas, we actually did 3 different model simulations. So one was looking at what typical currents look like during a spring period. One was looking at typical conditions during the winter. And one was looking at storm conditions. So we actually took the March 2018 series of 3 storms and attempted to replicate that in the model environment using all of those different inputs of collected and measured data that we have from NOAA and the NDBC buoy, et cetera. And so what you're seeing here is, I believe, the spring run of that model. All right. So I think we've had probably enough time with Pulpus. So just a couple of big observations from our work in Pulpus Harbor. So what we see is really that waves are moving sand into the inlet, both from the north and the south. And tidal currents are redistributing the sand within the inlet, and that's creating the shoaling that we see. Next, we'll move on to Upper Harbor. And again, I'll give this a second to play. It's using the same color scale here. And so the brighter red, yellow, green colors are indicating faster currents. So, especially over here, it's probably as one might expect. And you can see also, those colors popping up again in Pulpus. And the direction of the arrows is showing us which way the currents are moving. And again, I'll give that just a couple minutes to play. I think for for Upper Harbor, we're looking at a smaller tidal cycle. So I think this covers about 5 days, 5 days worth of runtime in this animation. That's a little bit shorter. Hit it once more. All right. So when we look at Upper Harbor, we can see kind of as that video was playing, the cuspates forming. You probably saw kind of the higher velocity sand areas kind of off some of the points there. And so as we're watching the model, we can actually see some of these tidal and wind formed features emerging. But we also see that the shoreline here is relatively stable, though there is mild erosion along CO2. But importantly, we note that there's no source of sand feeding the beach from the harbor side, and that may have sediment management implications. When we look at Mattakit Harbor, we see some different trends. So notably, a lot of the color is out here, which is probably what you would expect. This is more exposed, and so you're seeing a lot more of the strong currents moving out here outside of the harbor. And so it is a little bit difficult to see the changes in color here within Hither Creek and kind of up into the boat launch here. But you can kind of see those small differences in current as this tidal cycle runs. I will note, you can see kind of the background imagery popping up over here. And that's just indicating that shoal is actually kind of emerging and no longer submerged by water at certain points during our modeled tidal cycle. So I'll let Mattakit play again for you all. All right, and when we're looking at some of our high-level observations from Mattakit Harbor, we see that there's very little sand transport into Hither Creek, though we did note some shoaling at the mouth. I didn't mention this at the top, but something we confirmed with our sediment samples is that the sediment within Hither Creek and a lot of the surrounding area in Mattakit is primarily mud, and so it would not be really suitable for beach nourishment if we were to dredge it anyways. And when you look kind of further out into Mattakit Harbor, we see, as you know, extensive eelgrass beds, but also most of the sand movement that's happening out there is really storm driven. It's not happening as much with these everyday tidal cycles. So that's a little bit of our preliminary model results. And I think now, Vince, unless there's anything you wanted to add, we can turn it over to Q&A and comments.
You go ahead, Vince.
I'm all good from my side. Just to point out that this was there was an extensive process to get to this point, to have these models to show us where sand shoals, how sand moves, how currents move in our harbors. And when we initially took this for public presentation a couple of weeks ago, we did ask the public, and got a lot of extremely good feedback about, well, where do you see problems? We asked people what kind of boats they had, what kind of draft each boat had, what do you use your boat for, recreation or for scalloping or for some other commercial purpose or whatever it happened to be, and where you see issues, so that we can match it up with what those who use the water know and with the model, and then see where needs dredging in terms of usage. So that's one of the questions that I'd like to bring forward here today. Not only questions about the model, but questions about where we can put in, you know, those dredge navigation channels where we can take out sand in order to increase access to areas that are needed, and so for the types of activities that are currently going on, and what makes sense in terms of the model as well, because we did see within the Matticat Harbour area there are unique features, sorry, the Nantucket Harbour area, there are unique features like the cuspate spits, and how do we work with those? Mr. Chair, if you want to take the questions in the order you prefer.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Doug, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Great job. It was really interesting to look at the animation, especially. I was noting there's no animation yet, or no model yet, I guess, for the lower harbor. Is that planned for the future?
So our model does actually include the lower harbor. Just for visualization purposes, we focused a little bit more on the upper harbor area. I think something to note is that obviously the main channel is maintained by the Army Corps. And so even if we looked at what's happening there, which we have results for there, but we wouldn't be planning to dredge, you know, as a town anyways. So that was not necessarily our focus, is more looking at the areas that are under the town's ability to act.
Very good. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Devin, for this presentation. I had a question on when you were on the harbor high-level takeaways. You said something about no source of sand into the harbor, and I was just hoping you could expound on that a little more. What does it mean, and how do you get that from the model? I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah, let me move back to that slide so we have something to look at. So yeah, I think one of the main things that we saw with this model is that while sand is moving around within the harbor, there's no direct source for sand. So sand may be coming, you know, through the main channel and in, but there's nothing coming, you know, off the coast of the interior to feed the sand movement. And so I think the implication there is if we were to remove sand from the upper harbor, there's nothing that can replace it because we're not seeing any sand entering, right? And so you would end up having potentially a sand sink.
Yeah, I mean I have concerns about, you know, dredging offshore of salt marshes and that phenomenon that's been seen elsewhere as far as pulling sediment away from the salt marshes and filling areas, you know, where you've dredged. But
Right.
I guess, and maybe this is just a digging deeper into the model, but were there measurements of sediment that was coming off the beaches and things in the harbor?
Yeah, good question. So this is something that did also come up during our open house last week, and we got a lot of feedback that folks have seen, especially more recently, like mulch and just other sediment sources or debris sources running off the interior of the harbor into the harbor, and a lot of folks noted kind of eelgrass die off right along the coastline because there was so much sedimentation kind of burying that eelgrass like right along the interior of the harbor.
Okay.
So yeah, we did note that during the open house. From the modeling side, when we prepare the inputs for the model, we do look at the topography of the land and the bathymetry of the water. So we do have at one point in time what the topography looked like, but because it's just one point in time, we're not necessarily capturing, say, if a homeowner reinforces their beach and therefore, you know, adds more sand to that topography or to the land area. And then maybe that sand over time erodes into the harbor. We can't capture that because it's happening over a longer period of time than the inputs for our model, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
have just a few, it's like I'm
That's okay.
building off what you're saying and
Yeah.
I'll be done in a minute. Two things. One, I wonder if, because you did bathymetry and the elevation pieces in 2023, if it's possible to do again in 2025 to prove the results of the model. And then the other piece I want to add, and this is observations I've had over 16 years, is that, you know, we have erosion in, like, we have our sediment sources in the harbor are what's coming off of the beaches and the cliffs and the banks. And, you know, there are areas that have more sediment that they're giving naturally, not just mulch and everything else coming off, but, you know, just natural sedimentation in. And since there has been more shoaling in areas where we now allow sacrificial sand for people that are protecting banks, or at least that's an observation that I've had and other people have had, so that there are, you know, some sediment sources. It's not, you know, I guess you're saying the tide coming in through the jetties isn't bringing a lot of sediment in, and there aren't the same sediment flows maybe as, you know, on the outside of the island, but there are sediment inputs within the harbor. And I think understanding where those are coming from is going to be really important to deciding, like what you were saying, if we do dredge, are we then creating a sink within our harbor? So understanding the amount of sediments, like Pocomo gives a lot of sediment, you know, off of the field station gives a lot of sediment. Like there are areas where there is, at least for the harbor, a significant amount of sediment. So I'm just curious to see how that could be incorporated into the model.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the problem, maybe not the problem, but there's definitely a limitation to available data on those things. And so if it has not been well documented, it would be very difficult to include. I think the issue we get to later is that just the way that this model works is we kind of have to choose a period in time that we want to project. And so, for instance, we looked at winter 2018 and looked to kind of replicate what how that would play out. And because these input events are kind of either happening gradually over time, or let's say somebody put out sacrificial sand and there's a big storm, like that's happening at different periods in time. And so I don't think with this model we would be able to capture that evolution over time, which I think
so the
is
model
main
doesn't
concern.
take, like, you couldn't do sediment, you know, sediment probes within the harbor and take that data and put it into the model.
No, I don't believe so. I can follow up with our technical team to confirm, though, because I think it's a really interesting issue. And
part
obviously,
of it,
yeah.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your responses.
Thanks, Jen. Leah, go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. I have a question and a comment. So the comment for the Mattakit observations, did you take into consideration, or, you know, maybe it can just be an asterisk or something like that in the report, is that when breaching occurs at between Esther's Island and at Esther's Island, so that area used to be open, and that's what created all of that sediment, where when you run the model you can see that those areas are bare during low tide. Does the model take that into consideration at all, or did it?
Like that specific event?
Yeah, so it was open for probably over a year, I would say.
2007 to 2009. So yeah, that one.
I got a partial answer on this, if it helps.
Go for it, Vince. Yeah.
And through Peter, if that's okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So the breach that occurred between 2007 and 2009 was not modeled, but the timeframes we're looking at here are far more recent. So from spring was it, and 2023 and winter and into winter 2023 is the time frame that's modeled. And then the storm model was from Grayson, I think was it February or March 2018. So that's the time frame that's modeled. Jen is getting to a lifetime of experience practically on CO2 and other parts of the island, and we all know about breaches that occurred. but we're still just working in a model within those timeframe parameters. In order to look at other breaches, we'd have to see them happen again or know how the breach occurred, say in 2007 to 2009, in order to model it. We don't have that data. I don't think anybody captured it at the time, so we couldn't model it or go back. And in terms of getting more information into the model, we have the data we have captured, we have the information that's available to us, and we can always look at potential updates, but we're moving now towards trying to understand where might be good areas to dredge.
Okay. And then my question is for those areas in Mattakit that are, super sandy, there's not eelgrass there, it's exposed at low tide. Would those be potential areas to dredge for beneficial reuse?
Yeah, I think there's a possibility for sure.
I'd also like to consider them in terms of habitat restoration potentially, but we'd actually have to understand their current habitat value as well.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Leah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting to see the model results. And one thing I was realizing after, kind of get to the end, I was trying to go back to see again the model inputs because I'm kind of reminding myself, but we don't actually have a copy of this in the packet. And so what I was trying to figure out was what was input into the model for the actual sediment. So, but maybe it's not there. Thank you. I was trying to flip back. So I understand the wind, wave, and tide and the bathymetry and so what we're actually modeling are the currents and the wave action and the tides and the flow.
Mhm.
And as you said yourself that the different, parts of Mattakit have the more mud layer and there's anyway, I guess my question is, I wanted to go back to look at what was in the model. And then how does the model deal with the fact that there are different types of sediment in the different areas? And what's the next step for interpretation of that? And, maybe you said this at the very beginning, but I went through the whole thing and then kind of wanted to go back and I was trying to think how I see that there's sediment cores. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I'm my head is kind of all over the place in terms of where we're at in the stage. And how the different sediment types kind of fed into the model of where the sediment is going and what the recommendations then will be for dredging and use of spoils. Maybe I should have asked this at the very beginning before the presentation, but I need to see it a few times to kind of go, okay, and get it all together.
No worries. Yeah, so we did collect sediment samples, and this was one of the primary inputs into the model. So this model is actually really built for non-cohesive sediments. So it is meant to model sand. So admittedly, in areas like Mattakit, where we are seeing things that are not quite so sandy, right, in Hither Creek, it doesn't do as good of a job of moving those sediments because they are cohesive. So that is one limitation. But through the sediment sampling and also looking at historic sediment samples. So we took samples for our project, but also looked at what was available over time. We were able to input grain size into the model, and that really helps us to better understand how that sediment is moving, right? Because smaller grain size is going to move differently than larger grain sizes. And that was one of the variables that you can vary spatially throughout the modeling domain. And so we kind of matched it to what we were observing from those sediment samples, both collected by our team and historic.
Great. And then just to follow up, and then what are and you may have started with this, but once again, I'm sorry for kind of now coming back to it. In terms of next steps, and maybe this is for Vince too, is based on that model effort and the grain size and the sand and how it's moving, what is the next step for taking this into a recommendation phase?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now our next step is the engagement to basically gut check what we're seeing in the model. So are there additional areas of concern that maybe we aren't seeing in the model results or vice versa? So really trying to understand from the folks who know these waterways best, where are they running into issues? Is that happening seasonally? Is it every year? Is it only after storms? Does it depend on the type of boat? So really trying to understand the nuance of the navigation issues, because really at the core, we're hoping to dredge as needed to resolve the navigational impacts. So that's what we're looking towards.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And I see your hand up, Doug, but I really got something to say, so I'm going to jump ahead of you and I'll get right to you. So on what Devin just said about looking at areas, navigational areas, and opportunity to spend the night on Tuckernuck in August. I got a ride over with a friend, and on the way back, I was got a ride back with the Sousa ferry service, and I was absolutely astounded at how shallow it was going into the little lagoon there that has been created by the sand growing down from Whale Point headed north. How shallow it was, how narrow it was. And I know it's a seasonal community there. I know that it's not a lot of people going over there, but it's still, people go over there. And I just want to put it out there that that might be something to work into the model, as well as possible place to dredge, if that's possible. I don't think you can find a boater that goes over there that doesn't agree with me. And I was only over there once. And the guy I was with, Mark Sousa, said, okay, it's getting shallow now. Look, it's shallow. And I looked at the water and it was dark. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's dark. And then all of a sudden, I could have put my hand down and touched the bottom. It was so close. And he had to pull the motor up. And this was only at, almost high tide. So, and then the second thing is, another area you should consider is basically in front of Co2, between First and Co2 points, an area that we call the Horse Shed. And every year, I serve on the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. Every year we get complaints from the scallopers who say that the fast ferries are, they are throttling up before they get to the cut in the East Jetty, and they are not throttling down until they go past the cut and into the harbor, which means that area is shoaling up with sand. So sand is being brought in by at least by the ferries. Sand is being distributed and moved into the harbor. Where it goes from there, I'm not sure, but that's an issue for the people who fish in the harbor.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I have responses on both.
Sure.
Thank you. So the way that this contract is set up, the Tuckernuck is outside of it. But that said, I'm already working very closely with the Tuckernuck Land Trust. The issue being that Tuckernuck is ostensibly all private. And so if we were to do some dredging over there, what private land do we put the sand on? And I can honestly say that if I was to propose the idea that we do some dredging on Tuckernuck and take the sand back to Nantucket, I wouldn't think much of my job. I think that there would be uproar. So to that end, I have started working with the Tuckernuck Land Trust, and I've had some very good conversations with some of their board members about how we can approach some of the dredging issues over there with the Tuckernuck Land Trust. It's also one of the reasons why we got an opportunity in the development of this project to undertake the eelgrass study and expand it to Tuckernuck as well. It was a preemptive way in the development of the project to start looking at the issues at Tuckernuck, so we'd have some of the base data that will be necessary for later phases to start looking at how to undertake dredging there. It's something that we're exploring quite diligently.
Can I just interrupt you before you get to the next thing? So I realize it's all private, but there are people that spend time there. And in terms of emergency services, if things happen and you need to get a boat there, I doubt a Coast Guard boat could get in there if something happened. I know that if there are circumstances where people need immediate attention and a helicopter goes in and does that. But still, this is Tuckernuck and Muskegon are part of the town of Nantucket. So there has to be some, anyway.
Yep.
That's my piece on that.
Agreed, and we're pursuing it for exactly
okay.
those reasons too. Thank you, Peter. And then for the horse shed, loud and clear, heard you. We also got the same thing at the public feedback. There were, I don't want to name names because they're not here and don't want to have bad form, but many scallopers said the exact same thing about the horse shed, and we're also looking into that. And either does dredging have to happen there, because that's the point of this plan, or is it something that's responded to in a different way? That is a policy issue, say from, I don't know, I'm trying to think it out now, say from the harbour masters about controlling speed within the harbour area. So maybe it's a dual response. Maybe it's a harbour master's response on speeding and fixing the no wake areas, and it's a restoration of dredging and the horseshed, possibly both. We're looking into both.
Okay, so in answer to that, every year that we get the complaints from the fishermen, we send letters to the ferry companies reminding them of this, and we coordinate that effort with the harbor master, who then calls the ferry companies and tells them to slow down. And I'm told by our harbor master that the way that you really get it done is the harbor master issues a citation to the ferry companies, which I guess the harbor master in Hyannis has done to get those guys to slow down. So there's a fix out there somewhere.
It sounds like you've investigated this and that there is a fix.
Well, I always end up writing the letters. So
I'll follow up with you and Sheila on this on the side, if that's okay, Peter.
Sure, Vince. Okay, Doug, want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'll make it quick. Just back to the lower harbor. When the U.S. Army Corps does that dredging, I'm curious how often that happens, and when it happens, what is done with the sand from that dredging? Thanks.
Great question. I think we are actually still hoping to get more information from Sheila about the cadence with which the harbor or the main channel is dredged. I don't have a great answer for that right now, unless Vince, you have some additional information.
No, still same boat.
Yeah.
Pun intended. Waiting on Sheila to come with that answer. And anecdotally, the material that's been dredged has had two different uses. A lot of the time, more recently, it's gotten shipped to New Bedford, I think, for disposal, because the U.S. Army do that. And I think once upon a time it was put up around Brown Point, up around the lighthouse. On that property, it's a U.S. Coast Guard property there.
I would say that recently, though, the Army Corps did update their policies, and they're now striving for, I forget the exact percentage, but a fairly high percentage of beneficial reuse of all sediment that is dredged. So if that area were to be dredged moving forward, there would be more political kind of pressure and policies to indicate it could be used for beneficial reuse rather than shipped off to New Bedford.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Doug. Go ahead, Joanna.
Thanks. I just actually sent a link to Leah and to Vince that I want them to share with the group. I think some of you know that the MMA put a buoy in the harbor, and that whatever the data that it's collecting is available to everyone. So it's live and on the website now, and that might be something that the folks from Arcadis might want to take a look at. I mean, it's been working since, I don't know, August 15th. So the data is all very, very new, and there's no conclusions of anything, but it's interesting to go and take a look at it. So I'm sure that they'll share it with everyone, and you can go to the website and look at it, and then we'll issue some type of a report at the end of the summer. And we are not 100% sure where we will go next year, if it will go back to the same spot, or if we'll change spots, so that we can try to learn some different things about the existing conditions in the harbor. But I thought I would just share that since it's pertinent to our discussion.
Can I ask a question on that, please, Mr. Chair?
Sure, go ahead, Vincent.
So 2 questions, Joanna. One is very simple. The location, I believe it's off the Horseshed or that kind of area, just off the tip of Co2.
Yes.
And then the second one is the kind of information it collects is things like pH, temperature, algae, and dissolved oxygen and nitrates. Is there other information beyond that it collects?
Yeah, there's a few other things, and you can see it right on the chart. Yep, and there's room, here's actually probably an interesting opportunity for us to consider. There is room for us to add other detectors onto the buoy. So if there was a particular thing that a group of people wanted to measure and get data from, I mean, there's a cost, but it's not outrageous. So we're also open to adding more of the measuring devices.
Okay, Vince, and thanks, Joanna. Go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Peter. Well, I have one observation and one question. My observation is that I'm a little surprised when I heard you folks use the term, the purpose of the study, looking at the navigational issues. I didn't think this was about navigational issues. I thought this was a response to the Coastal Resilience Plan, which when we were looking at the plan, some of the Asian efforts that we were talking about require sand, and we were trying to figure out where we get the sand from. And I thought that that's what the purpose of the dredging study was. It was not about navigation purposes. So that's my observation. My question is, at some point in this study, will you get into the issue as to, once we know where it's okay and where it's suitable to do dredging, to obtain yards and yards of sand, are we going to look at, or will this study inform us about the possible costs of doing these dredging projects? Because in each case, we're going to have to look at a cost-benefit analysis. What are the costs of doing the dredging versus the harm that we're trying to avoid? So will this study get into the cost of dredging or not?
If I can, Peter?
Go ahead, Vincent.
I'm going to take the first part and then probably look to Devon for the second part. The first part is simple and I would have thought obvious. For navigation, it's two birds with one stone. So we're getting two things for the price of one here. So we're getting the sediment transport study that covers the whole harbors. We're getting the understanding where to dredge for navigation, and then it gets to the beneficial reuse. Any sands that are dredged, we're going to use for beach nourishment projects. So it's a win-win. It's hitting more than one thing. So the town already wanted to have a 10-year dredge plan, and that's what this does. And I've said this before in other public settings, we're effectively doing it in a very, very similar way to the way that it was done over in the vineyard in Edgartown. And what's that other town called? I beg your pardon. It's gone right out of my head. The one right to the south of Edgartown. Oak Bluffs to the north. The way that their dredge plan works is what we're doing. So this is not just where do we go mining for sand. This is where do we mine sand in a way that makes sense, where we can improve navigation and then beneficially reuse it. In terms of the volume, that's kind of more of a question for Devon, and that's something that's going to hopefully be an output of this just to understand it in a couple of different ways. So Devon mentioned about a sandbank. We need to know the volumes, roughly speaking or broadly, that we're going to be dealing with so that we understand what kind of area we might need for a sandbank, and also what nourishment sites on town property we can start to look at in the near future as well. Do you want to take more on that, Devon?
Yeah, I think when it comes to cost estimates, there will be a high level quantitative understanding of costs based on what Vince just mentioned, the volume of the dredge and how, what type of dredging would be needed in that area. So we'll definitely be looking into that. I think in terms of more the benefit cost analysis and looking at pros and cons, that type of assessment would be more on the qualitative level, right? So some assessment of pros and cons and trade-offs, but in a qualitative way. So,
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Devon, and thank you, Gary. Other questions or comments?
One, if you will entertain it, please.
Yes, Vincent.
Back to the original request, now that we've seen the model, understand where how things work a bit better. Is there anywhere that, and Peter already covered this, he has mentioned the horse shed. Are there any other locations people would like to see dredged or any other purposes realized?
Okay, yep, Sarah, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess taking a step back, I'm curious about how you're using the information about where people want dredged. I think part of I don't know, I definitely don't have an answer to that. And I guess I would hope that the town, Natural Resources Department, and then the results of this plan would rely more on the things that are measured, the things that we know we value. You know, we don't want to impact eelgrass beds and other things. And the scientific data, I worry. I mean, I think it's important to have a public comment for sure, and people that are on the water every single day and telling you where the areas are that are filling in. But I want to take that with the scientific information. And so I am definitely not an expert in where the sediment should be dredged. And I just, so just that as a caveat. And then I have a follow-up question, but I know you had a specific question, Vince, if you want to take other people's comments before my general question.
Only just to say that I agree with your approach entirely, and that's the same approach we're taking. We are looking very closely at the scientific data and the information that was collected, but we're trying to match it up with how the harbour functions and the usage of the harbour. Please don't take me the wrong way in this. If somebody has a very particular request that's right in front of their house, not sure we can listen to that. If a lot of people say that we need to fix the entrance to Palpas Harbour, we see it in the model, we see it in the public feedback, that just adds all the credence we need to why we need to look more at the entrance to Palpas Harbour. So yes, agreed.
Great, thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Go ahead, Sarah. We do have other items to get to, but go ahead.
Yeah, this was kind of a follow-up sort of to tie it up in a bow. What's the timeline for kind of the next phase? And you may have, once again, have said this in the very beginning, but I don't remember at this point.
For Devon.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Good question, Sarah. I think we're hoping to have everything wrapped up this spring. So end of March 2025 is what we're aiming for right now.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any other comments? All right. Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you very much, Devin. Awesome presentations. Huge
Thanks for having me.
Eye opener for at least myself, and I'm hoping everybody else.
Thank you. See you at SHAB, I guess.
Yes. Okay, so item number 7, initial thoughts and discussion on updating the zoning bylaw and regulations with coastal resiliency. I'm just going to get it going and see what the rest of you guys have to say about this. I know it's a challenging task to look at the zoning bylaw, and I know that we all roll our eyes at town meeting whenever we have to discuss zoning. But our charge is coastal resilience and somehow integrating it into the various regulations and bylaws for the town. So it's just a quick look at the zoning bylaw over the past couple of days, and anticipating that we're going to be recommending some changes. We may want to add relevant definitions to the definitions in the zoning bylaw, such as coastal resilience, sea level rise, climate change, storm pathways, retreat adaptation. I'm sure we can all think of other things that'll be pertinent. And then I looked at the overlay districts, the public wellhead recharge district, which could shrink depending on how the island shrinks, the flood hazard overlay district, the harbor overlay district. All of those could probably benefit from some help from us, some adjustments from us, and that's as far as I went. But I also thought that maybe there might be some possible new overlay districts that would be adopted. Obviously, that would be in large part with our advice and the planning board's help, but maybe a storm pathways district for people that lived along the storm pathways, along the ponds, the South Shore outwash ponds. maybe that's something that happens. Maybe there is a sea level rise district separate from the coastal resilience districts. And maybe, I'm not thinking maybe, I'm thinking definitely we should have a workshop meeting, which we focus only on this topic. What do you guys think? Okay, Doug, go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to look at or watch the replay of our last meeting, because we had the same topic on the agenda. And I think there was a fairly extensive conversation about and a pretty strong consensus, I think, that our first step ought to be to go to the CRP and refer to all the recommendations that Arcadis came to the island with. I've reviewed them a couple of times since then, and I think they're really pretty comprehensive. Not to say we couldn't add to them, and I like your idea. I think there's a lot of things we could tack on to that list. But I do think we'd be smart to just acquaint ourselves, if we're going to be the people advocating for the CRP with all the various regulatory boards. I think our first step is for each of us to get reacquainted with what was called for in terms of zoning and land use regulation changes in the CRP, and they're quite extensive. To that list, I did add a couple, and I think Matt echoed my enthusiasm for the idea of finding ways for liability to be shifted from the town onto builders and home buyers who choose to develop in land that is at risk, and make sure there's some sort of buyer beware or builder beware language in the planning. I'm sorry, in the zoning regulations. And I think there's some discussion of that in the Arcadis recommendations, but I think we could probably go a little deeper on that. And I'll leave it at that. I just think that we all, I think, collectively said, wow, there's a ton here that we need to get smart about. And then let's sit down with our counterparts or the staff in the planning department and see if we can chip away at that list. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. I also wasn't at last time's meeting, so I apologize for that, but I wanted to echo like what a lot of the people on this meeting had said, and some of the recommendations or thoughts that were written into the packet is really just I want to echo, going back to the CRP. And I think the other thing is, if it needs to be kind of staged out, thinking of the kind of easier, maybe low-hanging fruit, which is adding those definitions, adding just more of the language. I think both Rachel and Pete just said that. And I do agree with what you were just saying, Pete, about a working meeting. I think it would be really good if that's like the primary focus and everybody digs in. Maybe preemptively there's some, kind of draft things to look at that we are going to put in or to discuss. However it works, I would really support something like that. And, just to follow up, I think that a lot of those kind of thinking of the different either overlay districts or ways that we communicate about the risks of storm surge and sea level rise are like Doug just said it so succinctly, of being like buyer beware is, I think that's a lot of what we've been trying to get out. And, is really just, that there's a big knowledge base about where the kind of more at-risk areas are and how are we communicating that best. And I think to Doug's point about shifting that liability, I don't know what legally we can do or what language we can put in there, but I agree with all of that. So I think there's been a really good discussion already and a basis for it. So I would support doing a separate kind of workshopping meeting to really nail down some specifics.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Go ahead, Joanna.
Yes, one of the questions that I had about this, and I also wasn't at the meeting last time, so I apologize for not knowing if you already spoke about this. With regard to zoning changes, has there been discussion with the zoning board about this? And do they know that this is something that we're looking at? And I mean, I would really support that type of meeting with them in advance of us getting too far down the road so that we understood how the CRP and some of its recommendations, you know, maybe naturally flowed into some of the work that they're doing, or that it doesn't, and what is the work that we have to do to make that happen, right? Because I read through the big document that you sent, and I thought that was like a bear for us to try to, you know, get through and say, okay, well, you need like 14.2 needs to change and that type of thing. So I think that we need some structure to this process. I mean, I know that there's other people on this call who are well-versed in zoning.
Okay, Joanna, I'm going to answer a little bit of that and then go to Doug. We did have, over the course of the summer, we had the regulatory board, either chairman or administrators before us, telling them what we were all about, asking them for advice. We had Leslie Snell, planning director, and said, this is what we're working on. So they know we're working on it. I disagree that we should put it back on them. I know you didn't say that, but we're trying to basically integrate coastal resilience into our existing regulations and bylaws where we need to. We're not going to go into areas where we don't need to go. So they know we're doing it anyway. And we can certainly have them back if we need to have them, like maybe for the workshop or a future workshop, we could have planning board people there. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I was going to say much the same, Peter, in answer to Joanna's question. I do feel like they're on alert. They've been advised that we are looking to incorporate CRP related initiatives and language into their regulatory framework. So I think everyone is understanding this is coming. I do recall one very pointed discussion we had with the leaders of the planning board, where they urged us to work with staff as opposed to bringing it to the board, and let staff kind of navigate the nits and gnats, because there's a lot of them. And I know Leah could probably speak a whole lot more intelligently than I can, but I do believe that the level of complexity and nuance that's going to be required to get through this is not something we're going to accomplish, I think, in a public meeting of 2 hours. It's going to take weeks and probably a lot of offline work between staff groups. That would be my take. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Doug. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, what we discussed last meeting was that CRAC will take the recommendations, obviously, from the CRP, and then if there's any additional ones that were left out, that will create a bullet list of the different recommendations of how to maybe incorporate coastal resiliency into the zoning bylaw. And then having that sheet or sheets, I can then go to Plus staff, or we can have them to CRAC or whatever, and we can share that information, and then they can vet it and say, this isn't going to work, or, that sounds good. And then that would go to the planning board. So it's going to be a very long process, but you all are going to help kind of kickstart that. So that's where that's our goal here.
And thanks, Leah. And just a comment about, the length of this process. This committee is going to turn over. There'll be new members in here. Not all of you may be on this committee as we achieve this goal. So it's not something we've set a goal to complete in 6 months. It might take longer than that. And then some people will get off and new people will come on. It's just that we're trying to get this going now before the next glacier calves off and the water comes up 10 feet. And we're trying to get the process going now and not leave it for somebody else. We're laying the foundation for it. Are there any other comments? Go ahead, Joanna.
Sorry, I mean, yes, I guess because of some of the other things that other committees and stuff that I've served on and trying to change these sorts of processes or add input to these processes, it is a challenging process overall. And one of the thoughts that I have is, and maybe there's a way to do this and maybe there isn't, but could we take from the CRP, let's just start with three things that we think that we need to address regarding zoning. Because what I'm trying to get at is if we can simplify this, or how do you, you know, that saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? If we can kind of break this into what we consider right now to be the three most important things, and we choose to work on that and that alone, then maybe we'll get some traction and we'll learn the process of this, so that as we move forward, there will be some people in this group who can shepherd the process. Because to your point, we will switch in and out, and but we have to have a starting point. And at least from where I sit, it feels very overwhelming. So if we could identify what those things are, I think that would be good for the group. It's just a thought.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. I agree. Go ahead, Doug.
I totally agree, Joanna. I was nodding vociferously as you were talking. To me, I think the simplest, maybe the only way to get started logically is to just go back to the CRP, look at the sections, page 96 through 111. It doesn't even, I don't even know if we have to go that far, but starting at 96. I've tried to copy and paste into a document that I attached, or I sent on to Leah, and it's the last 6 pages of the packet for this week's meeting. It's all in there. And I would imagine that one possible next step from your suggestion, Joanna, is that each of us read those 6 pages, get out a crayon, circle the ones that you think strike you as the most salient, most critical. And maybe they're not the biggest, maybe they're the most bite-sized. I don't know. It's let everyone be the judge. And then we compare notes when we get together. And oh, by the way, don't forget, to Peter's point, don't hesitate to add to that list if you think there's something that was missed in the CRP but would be relevant for a conversation with planning. And like I said, I feel like I've kind of started that process myself, but I really think everyone on this call should be doing that if we want to start taking this, making progress on this. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. I'll get you in a second, Matt. And still, while you're doing that, have another window opened on your laptop or your computer with the zoning bylaw, so you can refer to that. It may spark something else, so that we're being thorough. I know the zoning bylaw is a bear. Believe me, I've covered it as a reporter, but we should be thorough. So yes, I agree with you, Doug. Go ahead, Matt.
I think Doug and Joanna make a good point. What are the bite-sized chunks? What can we do first? I also think that they're asking us for staff to work on it. We should be asking our staff, what are of those recommendations at the end of the packet today, which ones are most likely to be, what recommendation would you make that you can work on and get buy-in from the planning board on, that we can get done right away? I think, they're asking our staff to do it. What I heard in the meeting was, oh yeah, we really do need to do something about this, when we had planning staff in, but we had a lot of what we couldn't do. A lot of this was illegal from the state, and this is this, and this is that. A lot of things why we can't do it. I think the conversation staff to staff need to be, which ones of these things can we do? And let's get a couple of I look at it as, how can we get some victories and show that this is a positive thing? I think it's somewhat viewed as a negative, as you're taking rights away, and we're going to get people mad at us and all those other thoughts. What is it how can we turn this positively and use the recommendations and the work that's already done to start the process? Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Gary.
Thanks, Peter. This reminds me of the movie Groundhog Day, because we keep talking about the same thing each meeting and we don't do anything about it. And we'll keep talking about it in the future. What we talked about when we met with the different regulatory commissions, we talked about, and I specifically asked Leslie whether or not they looked at these minimum provisions, including the one which is the recommendation of Arcadis in the plan that says Nantucket should adopt the provisions included in the Massachusetts 2020 model floodplain bylaw in order to continue participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay, that's really important for Nantucket. We want to continue to participate. And what Leslie said is, well, we might have to do some study before we can get to that. So we have to ask them, we have to ask the planning board to do whatever the study is necessary so that we can make whatever recommendation is necessary so we can be included in this model floodplain bylaw. That doesn't seem so hard to me. We don't have to have a workshop for that. All we have to do is just, we look at, the minimum is there. It's beautifully written by Arcadis. We talked to Leslie we talked to the planning board people about it. And now the next step is to say, okay, do this in order to get comfortable at regulation. So nothing has happened. And the third time we talked about it, we'll talk about it next meeting again. But if we don't do something about it, nothing will happen. I'm sorry, but I'm frustrated.
I'm frustrated too, Gary. I'm trying to make it happen. Thank you. Go ahead, Leah. And then we gotta move on.
I've been in contact with Shannon Holst from Woods Hole Sea Grant. She is like the floodplain extraordinaire. And she's going to be coming to our meeting on October 22nd to talk about all of this. I know that there were questions and some of the committee members wanted more of like a background about, you know, the FEMA flood maps and all of that stuff. So she's going to be talking about that. She also sent me, which Gary just brought up, the 2020 model bylaw. It is now mandatory for coastal towns in Massachusetts to update their to that and to those standards. And so she'll be talking about that as well. So I'm going to invite Leslie to that crack meeting and so that we can hopefully get that ball rolling.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leah. So I guess we're more or less talked out on this subject for now. A workshop is a good idea, but we don't have a date. And we more or less have our marching orders to look at the CRP items on zoning before we go too deep. So let's do that between now and the next meeting. And we can have a specific agenda item on that to discuss those and where do we go from there in a possible workshop. Does that sound good to everybody? Gary, do you have your hand up? Gary? Do you have something to say, Gary?
I'm trying not to let my phone interfere with that. The other thing we talked about at the last meeting, Peter, in which there was universal support from all of our members at the last meeting, was we all liked the idea of this hold harmless. And we talked about the fact that Rick Atherton had proposed that the annual meeting several years ago, and it did not succeed. And we said, but there was pretty strong support of all the people who attended our meeting, the last meeting, when we really wanted to push that. So that's another item that I'd like to what do we do for the next step? You know, Diane Atherton was on the call, the last meeting, and she said Rick had actually talked to town council so that it might even have been put in good legal form to go before the annual town meeting, but of course it was defeated. But maybe today there's an appetite for that kind of provision to hold harmless. And as I said at the last meeting, all of us who were on that call all said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We want to push that ahead. And once again, I'd like to see if we can get some momentum on that score as well.
Okay, Gary, Leah and I tried to get Rick Atherton to be at this meeting today.
Yes.
To do a good explanation of that, and he was unavailable. So it's we're on your page for sure.
Terrific.
Go ahead, Leah.
Oh, I was just going to say the same thing.
Okay. Okay. All right. So are we all set to move on? Okay, Vince.
One minor thing. This is from my history. Sorry, guys. When that article Rick Atherton brought up a few years ago went to town meeting, if I remember rightly, it didn't have any support at town meeting, as was said, but it also went with a negative recommendation, if I remember rightly, from FinCom.
All right, Doug, we really need to get going, but go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Vince, I've checked the history on this thing. I believe it was endorsed by FinCom, but planning did not support it. So it was a mixed bag in terms of support from the various groups within town government. And I have spoken to Rick about this a couple of times, and I know that it's been buttoned up in terms of its legal terms. So it's a matter of, is this the right time to push it forward again? And I get the sense it may be. So thanks.
I have one more thing on this. I remember it now.
Okay, Vince, who wants to go beyond 12 o'clock for today's meeting?
Okay.
I know Vince does.
I'll be as fast as I can. So
Okay.
I remember this article, and it was also something that's already enshrined in state law. So why is it needed at the local level was one of the big questions that was at planning board. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, we have silence. All right, good. We're moving on. So number 8, discussion on potential funding mechanisms to implement the town's coastal resilience plan recommendations. A little help, Leah.
So this was brought up at last meeting to, I believe by Matt, to generate a list of, ideas of funding sources, sustainable funding sources for coastal resilience projects, and to bring those recommendations forward to the select board. Coincidentally, this year in the select board strategic plan, there is a goal under the environmental section, which, let me just read to you, is to pull it up, incorporate recommendations of the coastal resilience plan in conjunction with other capital planning. So that is what I am tasked to do. And I have, different strategies to be able to do that, or hopefully be able to do that. And under one of them is to develop alternative sustaining funding sources to implement coastal resilience recommendations. So some that I have generated, which I'd love to talk here and see if there's any other ideas from the committee that we can create a list, which then we can then bring to the select board under a recommendation. So explore increasing embarkation fee and or allocate fees for coastal resilience projects. I believe right now the embarkation fees are funding the seasonal staff for the police department.
Yes.
Implement coastal resilience districts to fund non-island wide recommendations. Enact a coastal resilience tax or some sort of coastal resilience district tax when homes are sold to fund coastal resilience projects, similar to like what the land bank does. Explore increasing tax by a very small amount to fund coastal resilience projects. Explore selling excess sand use for money for coastal resilience projects. Explore how to use Chapter 91 license fees and fines for these projects. I'm not sure where those funds go. I think they go back to the state, but I feel like I spoke to Steve McKenna from CZM, and somehow you can have those fines and fees directed to the town. I'm not sure the process for that, but we can explore that. And then shift beach fund allocations so more money can be used for resilience projects. Those are my initial thoughts. Would love to hear from the committee, especially Christy from Capital Committee, and Joanna from Finance Committee.
Okay. Sorry to put you guys on the spot. Do you have any ideas, Christy?
No, just, listening to these for the first time, all good suggestions. There is, the town has this stabilization fund. I can't remember what the criteria is for that, but there's a percent of funding that the town needs to fund it. And it's, possibly something like that where, I think coastal resiliency will always come through Capital Committee and finance, but you know, maybe if there's a component of some sort of stabilization fund where it's an automatic a funding mechanism, you know, based on taxes and revenue. That's my initial thought, other than the normal, you know, funding sources that we use in capital committee. I'd love to, you know, ponder this one and think about some other options.
All right, thanks, Christy. Do you have anything to add, Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that, so everyone knows we are, let's just call saving at $1 million a year, right? That's our current structure, which is not going to be enough, and it's not going to be enough to fund this. So I think that it would be good to figure out a way to have there be another way to get money in the short term. And I don't want, like, we do have a very low tax rate, right? So that idea is feasible, right? I that would have to be voted on. But I also was thinking about, is there a way to have there be some kind of a thing that you can, like a permit or a sticker or some sort of a thing that is a way for someone to purchase something annually, and that money would be saved into this sort of savings account, right? So maybe, like, I'm just really thinking about this today as I was listening to you, like, you know, kind of like how we do beach stickers, right? You have to buy a beach sticker every year. Is there a way to buy a coastal resiliency sticker? And it's not, it could be voluntary at first, right? Where people could contribute to this, and it's a certain price, $50, $100, and it gets you some benefit, right? That would be what I would come up with to start.
Interesting.
Peter?
Yeah, go ahead, Christy.
I just want to add to, you know, obviously being mindful that, you know, that anything we come up with or that's presented doesn't, you know, present a huge hardship to, you know, anything we do with a, say, steamship or you know, fees, that's not just passed back on to, you know, no one wants to see, you know, ferry rates go up at all. So we just got to be mindful that we're not sort of taxing, you know, the public that already sees, you know, raising rates tremendous as a tremendous issue. But you know, it's going to take some creativity, no doubt.
But Peter, can I say something? I mean, we could just add $20 to the existing beach sticker, and that goes to the Coastal Resiliency Fund. I mean, they're not super expensive as it is.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to, I get you, Matt. Guess you'd have to figure out, you know, it's almost like a CRD in a way, because you have to figure out who the affected people are and then how you're going to tax that particular group. Or are you trying to just tax everybody because we all use the island? The island's surrounded by water, so coastal resilience is a thing that we need for the entire island. So everybody pays. You have to figure out how it's going to be equitable. There's always going to be people who are going to complain. But then what's the alternative? So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think it's great to have a list. At some point, you need to put numbers to the list, and a lot of these are going to not be worth pursuing. If we pursue too many, then people will not go for the big one or two that we really need. So at some point, you know, finance and staff and, you know, boards have to put some numbers to this. It's good to brainstorm, but, and so I do think that there is the other side is trying to raise the steamship tax. I think Hyannis and the Vineyard and, you know, and those guys, we are not proposing that, but they are proposing a tax. It doesn't raise very much money. And so it'll just upset people and not raise a whole heck of a lot. We have to be cognizant of how much the town has in other things. We've got $100 million island home on the horizon potentially. And it's easy to say our tax rate is low, and I know Joanna knows this. Our rate is low, but our assessments are high, and the change in value in some of the neighborhoods, you know, you just because the rate goes up 10% doesn't mean that your house only goes up 10%. If the value in your neighborhood has doubled, your taxes double. And a lot of the islanders are facing that now. I know I'm facing it on my employee housing, that the assessments behind because of some fancy, some really nice homes have bumped up everything else. And so people are strapped and are gonna be increasingly strapped as we go forward. I think we've got to find big amounts through grants, through betterments, through, stuff with the feds. Like, those are the things that we are gonna be in my mind, are gonna be the most meaningful. A lot of this might be just seen as nuisance taxes, nuisance fees. So when we get a full list, I think then we can start to like prioritize.
All right, thank you, Matt. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. I mean, it's, maybe it's because I come from a nonprofit background, but I don't think it would hurt us to think about the potential for some of the donors that we have on island that would be willing to help pay for things like, having access through the downtown, maintaining downtown and increasing resiliency. And, I don't know if I know that the town will take in, donation checks, but how do we facilitate that, make that something easier, maybe even make it something like there's a resiliency fund through the community foundation that can then be used in partnership with projects that the town is going after. And then the projects that we are moving ahead so far on as a town are all the ones that are public-private partnerships, and figuring out ways to leverage those public-private partnerships and actually make it a little bit easier to affect those in a relationship with the town. Lee and I have talked a long time about working on Folgers Marsh and how we put that forward. And I think there's the potential, with a nonprofit and with the town to move it forward, but sometimes those are harder to move forward with the town because they need to originate within the town and have someone managing those grants and other things within the town. So figuring out some pathways to make that more manageable, to build those public-private partnerships, I think is going to be one of the most successful things that we do. But right now there's a lot of, just kind of stumbling blocks and capacity towards moving those kind of partnerships forward.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, just a few points. To Jen's point, that could be an approach. I know we have in the past, we've had neighbors and private effort funding some sort of bike path sections. So there might be, especially if you have somewhere like Folgers Marsh Bridge that gives access to neighborhoods off of Pulpus, maybe there's some interest in some neighbors there, doing some partial funding or helping out. I also think if we're making a list, Leah, maybe something we can think about. It's fairly new, the Department of Stormwater, and maybe there's because stormwater will kind of has a little bit of relevance to us. We're not just trying to pick away at something that it's not relevant, but it does for us. And maybe if I know that when David, last time I met with him, they were talking about some funding sources to try to generate some funding sources through stormwater. So stormwater could be, a source for us to kind of keep on the back burner, and maybe we can tack onto that. And then my last thought was just considering the scope of coastal resiliency funding. I do think it is really something, although I think with Joanna's idea for, maybe adding on a little surcharge to a fee, to a permit for a beach could be great. But I also think that considering the scope, really need to find something that's built into, it's built in, it's a constant flow of, that generates revenue, similar to, obviously land bank fee. We all know that's the sort of they got the market on that, but we've seen that it seems like it's been difficult for housing to get a piece of that. So that's going to be, challenging, but I think it certainly suits some sort of infrastructure that's similar to that.
Right, thanks, Christy. Go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, just one more thought. If we are gonna get federal money, then we're gonna need to hire a lobbyist. Right. I mean, frankly, that's how that money and those sorts of things get appropriated in any type of big bills coming out of Congress. And I think that if we were going to do that, we should start to look at how we do that now, because this is like a long game, right? And these getting money in appropriation bills take a long time. And I think we're not just talking about things that can happen at this in the state of Massachusetts. I think we're talking about federal money that's going to come out of Congress and those bills. And there are lobbyists who live on Nantucket and who I'm sure would come in. I mean, I know one of them who would come in and talk to us about that type of process.
Okay. Christy, did you still have your hand up or?
Sorry.
Okay. Where do we go with this, Leah? Do we just keep having a discussion at the next meeting, or were you looking for some sort of definitive?
So from Matt's recommendation from last meeting was to generate a list, and it sounds like, Matt, you kind of updated that recommendation is to, can you say it again? To narrow it down more before we go to the select board?
Well, the select board, if you just give the select board a list, it's not gonna go anywhere. You know, what the select board, you know, oh, we have a list of all these things maybe you should do. It's gonna get put in a drawer. We're not gonna do anything, and staff isn't gonna do anything, you know? And so I think, how do I? Yeah, I'm trying to say this carefully. I don't mean to beat up the select board, but we've got to it's got to be thought through and put numbers and, you know, and I think Joanne is right. There, you know, there's a long game and a budget that needs to be created and a, you know, with a budget, you know, budget for people to, you know, help us get federal money, state money. You know, and maybe it's a position that needs to be created. I think us trying to do it in 10 or 15 minutes on a Tuesday when everyone's in a hurry to leave, it's going to be the same with the select board. You know, so somehow we've got to get recommendations that have more meat on the bone proposed if we want something to happen. You know, if we have something easy we can do that isn't going to set a bad precedent, we should recommend that, you know. Maybe, so I don't have the answer. I wish, I'm sorry, Lee, I'm trying to be more helpful so that we can get something moving along. And I'm just, you know, maybe it's a week of rain has got me being a little snarky. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay, we got 10 minutes left and we got one more item that I want to spend a little bit of time on. We'll probably have to have her come back, but go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks. I do have a comment, but I just want to make sure, because this has come up before. If we're going to have really big things to talk about, we have to have less things on our agenda items. Because every time we bring up a big thing, I don't think we should rush it. But that wasn't my initial comment. That's just a general comment. I just want to go back to something Matt said, because I really agree wholeheartedly. Maybe there needs to be a position. I think we've talked about the idea of a grant writer has floated. And I know that's a very specific type of job, but maybe it's someone who helps coordinate the funding. I feel like it's really interesting being on this committee. This is the only town committee. Well, this was the first town committee I was ever on, and I learned a lot about the funding piece, you know, from writing so many grants myself. I learned from Leah that the town still has to have the money in hand, even though we're getting a grant for it. And so that was really eye-opening originally. And so I feel like if there is someone that is their primary job, whether it's just for coastal resiliency projects or some other project help as well, I think that would really serve to like grease the wheels of make these things go faster, because a lot of us in our professional realms can identify grant or funding opportunities as they come along at the state and federal level. But because you have to have like 2 years of planning ahead of time to make sure that there's money in, you know, at the town level, I feel like there needs to be someone who is planning that in the longer term. Anyway, I guess we can't be as responsive to opportunities as they come along, because we need to have that like backing, even though it's a grant that they're giving us money for. So I think that I would fully wholeheartedly support some kind of position where some of this was planned out more. I think within our group, we have plenty of grant writers that can help and, you know, work on text and work on grant applications. But I think in terms of those bigger funding dollars, I wholeheartedly agree with Jen too, that public-private partnership, we've seen that, you know, in many other communities work really, really well. And if there is a mechanism to make it, if not easier, but a little bit more streamlined, once again, to be responsive to things as they come up and those opportunities. So those are just a few of my comments about the funding.
Thank you, Sarah. Vincent?
Thank you. So coastal resilience districts were mentioned at the top by Leah. The bylaw passed at town meeting in the spring. We're working on the mapping portion of that, and the rules around the mapping is where we really are at the moment. Hopefully in the next several months, I'll have something to bring to possibly this committee and to the select board on the implementation. And second, and then that'll cover a huge amount of funding, localized funding. And then second, I'd like to start courting the committee for support to bring the home rule petition that the committee voted for back to town meeting, hopefully this spring. I would very much like this committee to be a driving force behind the home rule petition so that we can get the larger funding model from the state in place. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
The thought I had, a suggestion maybe for Leah and Vince, what is Arcadis or any of the other consultants? What would they recommend we do in the funding world? You know, do we need a staff hire? What funding should we go after? I mean, some sort of direction. You know, I feel like, you know, I'll speak for myself. I feel like I'm throwing darts. I have no idea, you know? And so, you know, what is someone that does this, you know, deals with a lot of communities, does this more often? What do they suggest we do?
We have other items on the agenda. So how many people are going to leave at noon? Or are we going to tell the person who's waiting to speak to us that she has to come back at the next meeting? What are we thinking here? The people who had their hands up.
Can I make a suggestion?
Christy.
We should move on to the next item so that you know, we have her here, and we should pick this up there.
Okay, I agree. So we're going to move right along to number 9, public outreach ideas, strategies from committee members. Discussion on how Acclimate can help Crack's outreach and education campaign with Ava Rollins, Acclimate's Director of Social Communications. Sorry to make you wait so long, Ava.
No problem, guys. There's so much exciting stuff to talk about. We can also totally move this to next time if people have to go. I don't want to be the thing that keeps people. So do you guys want to make a decision on that? Whether we want to have a quick chat now or wait till next time?
What do you guys want to do?
No offense taken if we want to shelve this.
I think this is too important of a discussion to try to rush it through in 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Thank you, Joanna.
Okay. Do we all feel that same way? And Joanna was just the one to say it.
Well, I would say also, Peter, you know, you had said this is kind of an opportunity to brainstorm together. You know, I'm not coming in here with a specific presentation. I'm coming in here to talk to you guys as major stakeholders. So I prefer when people aren't feeling, you know, tapped out from all the business at hand. I think that's probably a good idea.
Okay, so we will make it happen on at the next meeting, and we will put it at the top of the agenda instead of putting it at the end.
Thank you so much.
And listening to what Sarah Boyce said, we will try and have less items. But just so you know, Sarah, Lee and I were like kind of clutching at straws for what we were going to do for the agenda and trying to fill it out, and we weren't at all feeling like this was too much. So. You know, we have a lot of stuff to do, and we can put it all off, but I guess I got to manage the meetings better and just sort of cut people off and say, no, you can't talk anymore, and we have to move on. And so anyway, so we'll put this on the next agenda. And so we have time to go to new business.
Wait,
or
I'm
committee.
sorry, I'm sorry, I have my hand up. I have a question for Ava.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is in anticipation of brainstorming for the next time. One of the things last time you were here we talked about was funding. So I'm happy to brainstorm, but I want to know what our capacity is to brainstorm within. Or if that's a bigger question for next time, that's also a bigger question. I just didn't know if there was any update on that.
Well, then I would provide a little, like a positive update in anticipation of us talking next time, which is that we have received funding for my time to support you guys through the end of the year at least. And that was mostly due to the really touching positive feedback that everyone provided, because I did not come in like, you know, knowing how everyone was receiving what was going on there. So after a pause over the summer, we're now getting back into that work with like our central pillar mission supporting what you guys are doing in terms of communication. So it was actually really helpful to listen in today in terms of, you know, where the crack would like some more support in terms of communication. And I'd really love you to use my brain and skill set to support that and acclimate as a vehicle for that when it's appropriate. So we're funded for my time to support in that way. And I'm excited to do that. And I want to thank everyone for their feedback, because that made it clear to us that this was a good usage of time. And it also gives the organization a lot more of a direct call to action, a purpose, because it was aggregating all the partners. And now this is the central pillar in addition to that. So we're good. So really, I just welcome everyone's wish list and desires, and kind of talking about where we'd like to have greater communication. Is that having a better public communication in terms of how we engage the public to be part of these meetings? Is it what's on the agenda? Is it a recap? Is it calls to action outside of that this organization? You know, where are kind of the softer spots that would help from more creative ways of communicating with people, or maybe more impactful, maybe just strategy in general. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Yeah, that just helps for thinking for brainstorming for next time.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Ava. Okay. New Business Committee and Natural Resources Department reports from all of our representatives. Does anybody have any report? Any new business? Go ahead, Leah.
I'll be very quick, but as you all are aware, we had a lot of rain the last couple of days. And so on all of those days, I went out and documented flooding for the state. Easy Street was closed, not, you know, not all of the days, but for portions of the days because of flooding. So that was 4 days. So that really hits home why we need to figure out what we're going to do there as far as stormwater and coastal flooding for Easy Street. So just wanted to give a quick update.
Thanks, Leah. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. Sarah and I did the second annual Nantucket Climate Change Summit at the beginning of September. It was really, really great attendance. Again, really great conversation. NCTV recorded it this time, and the video will actually be on their YouTube. They said this afternoon, this evening. Once that link is up, we'll share it out so anyone that couldn't attend can watch the presentations and discussion that happened.
Okay, thanks, Jen. All right, well, I guess that takes us to discussion of upcoming meeting dates. Can you say what the next meeting date is, Leah?
Yep, it's on the agenda, October 8th.
October 8th. Okay, great. Well, I guess that's it. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks, Joanna. Second from somebody?
Second.
Second from Doug. Okay, roll call vote. Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Doug Rose,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Hi.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Peter.